Hello there, and welcome. I'm just pouring a bit of a drink here for me to enjoy, as we are going to be diving deep into some information today. But greetings to you all. It is I, Pathinder van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. And I can hope that today we can educate you. Because we are diving back into the world of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But we are not just doing a very simple dive into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. No. We're diving into some information which is, in a fact, critical. Now you may say to yourself, well, the title, or the information that you seem to be presenting, doesn't sound critical. And certainly, as a player, it is perhaps not as critical as a GM, but by the time I'm hopefully done today, you will understand why I say these two things form a foundation for a lot of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And when you talk about a lot of other subject matter, and even the things that I've talked about in the past, such as ancestries and classes, and even skills, a lot of it pertains back to these bits of information. So, good morning to you, everybody. Welcome. We're going to be diving into our good friend here, conditions, and our good friend here, traits, or keywords, key terms. Why don't we start with the one which is honestly going to be the one we will have to talk about the most. It's the one that, as a player, it's probably the most obvious you're going to be hitting and encountering. And certainly as a GM, you're going to have to be tracking it the most. So as I throw myself once again over into the talking corner, and I throw the information up here for you to see from Archives of Nethys to play along with the today, let's talk conditions. Basically, the idea is, in Pathfinder 1st Edition or D&D 5e, when we talk about conditions, we're often talking about negative effects that are hitting your character. This is very true when it comes to something like most of the conditions you will encounter in both of those editions. Granted, there are some sort of positive conditions you can get, but if you look over the list of conditions that you will see in Pathfinder 1st Edition, in D&D 5e, and a lot of other systems that have conditions that affect you, traditionally they are things that are effects that come about as part of something special happening. That's the best way to describe it. Something special happens, you get a condition. The thing about Pathfinder is there are more conditions, and there's a lot easier to hit these conditions. Some of them are going to come from spells, or creature effects, or feats, or class abilities, and certainly some of them are going to be positive, and there are plenty that are going to be negative. But the concept behind conditions is it's something affecting your stats. They persist, they have a duration, an ending amount, a removal of conditions, things like that, that define each of these conditions and how you get them and how they go. The rules basically are, if you get two of the same condition, the one that lasts the longest is the one that's affecting you. They're redundant, and of course they will have values. The values do matter because kind of like things, you only apply the highest values. So you could track both durations if one has a lower value. So if my lower value condition lasts longer, I would track the lower one, and the higher one for X number of time, lower one for X number of time. You do track that, and certain conditions override others. Those are basic rules of conditions. But already, you can see the groups of conditions here tell us something completely different on the way that we work with a lot of these conditions here. Degrees of detection. Are you observed? Are you hidden? Are you undetected? Are you unnoticed? Wow. This is already changing things drastically, because this is not just normal kind of stealth. Are you like observed or hidden? There are degrees of it, and these things here affect the way that interactions occur between you and your enemy. Certainly the senses, blinded, concealed, dazzled, deafened, and invisible, again, mixture between ones that feel a little bit more positive and ones that feel a bit more negative. Concealed and invisible traditionally help you. Well, being blinded, deafened, or dazzled, not good. The same with dying, though. Doomed, dying, unconscious, wounded. Most of those are varying degrees of dying. But the fact is, all of these and talking about them means that the system of dying is based around conditions. Now, Pathfinder 1E was very simple. It's you go into negatives, you go to a certain negative, you die. 5E introduced us to the death saves. What this is kind of giving us is death saves, but they're a condition rather than just a thing. We're now calling it a condition. And we'll explain that as we get into the conditions, but that's kind of where we're doing that there. Attitudes are a condition now. So now part of what's going on with the idealism of interactions with NPCs or monsters and their hostility to you comes down to conditions. And of course, lowered abilities, where things mess around with you. Those are all generally negative. So that's kind of the idea when we look at conditions here and these groups of them. But we should talk about these individually and kind of how they are. I'm going to talk about how each of these works and kind of how they break down. Blinded. You can't see. You're blind. It gives you some perception penalties to perception. Gives you some immunity to visual effects. It overrides dazzled. It breaks down what it is pretty simply. You can't detect things with vision. Simple as it is. That's kind of one that shows up in a lot of different places. Broken. It's an item condition, more of that, or an object condition where the object is broken. It can kind of still be used to a degree. It has penalties to it. It's not quite destroyed, but it's in bad condition. It gives you, when that happens, when it's at its hit point, it's got a broken threshold, basically, that it reaches. Clumsy, of course, is one of those movement ones where it has a value. And you take a status penalty equal to the condition for the to a bunch of different things. Now, we were looking at the values, which we're talking about. When a condition value reaches 0, the condition ends. And it gives a lot of conditions will give how long this is, basically. So it might tell you, like, the amount of time it is. Oftentimes, these have a rule for how it's reduced. So, if you have clumsy X, where it's a penalty, you'll also know how long that clumsy works, based on whatever gave it to you. Concealed. Now we're at one that kind of fits under the positive more conditions. Something is difficult to see. You can still be observed, but you're tough to hit as a target. They have to do a flat DC 5 check to target you with something. And if you fail that, it fails. Basically, it's reminding of what Pathfinder 1E would have had, of percentage chances of missing. But rather than an actual percentage chance, they've changed it to, I roll a d20. And I have a 25% chance of missing this person. Why is it a 25% chance? Well, technically it's a 20% chance. Because if I break this down into percentiles, which you can very easily, 1 to 4, which are failures on this dice, is 20%. So, I can roll this d20 and get that same 20% mischance as a flat DC check. It's taking these concepts and these different dice and they're standardizing it in this case. So the idea that you have a percentage mischance is still there, but in this case it's just a flat DC check. Confused, of course. It's a lot less complex than it was in certainly some other editions and stuff too, where Yeah, each time you take damage, you make a flat check to recover from your confusion condition, and the condition ends. So basically, it's you're confused, and when things hit you, there's a chance of doing it. You're flat-footed, which is another condition it's giving you, and you don't treat everyone as your ally. You can't delay, ready, or use reactions. So it's important things. And it limits what you do, also. So, and the targets are determined randomly by the GM. There you go. So basically, like, I would roll randomly to see who you target. If you can't see anybody, you babble. And when you get damaged, you have a chance of recovering. Someone slaps you, tries to get you into the thing. Controlled! I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. It's domination. It is a condition, though, now. That if you are mind-controlled in certain ways, you don't control your own actions. Dazzled. Remember, we talked about the blinded. Dazzle's a lesser version of it. It gives things concealed to you, if vision is a precise sense. Deafened, of course. Can't hear. Any kind of perception chance to heal. It gives you status penalty to initiative checks that are perception initiative checks. Because remember, perception is initiative. And basically, you can fail auditory traits. Hey, there's traits that you're going to talk about. Anything that's a sound-based trait ability that you use, whether it's a spell or a feat or anything like that, that is auditory, you have a flat DC 5 check where you have to use it or the action's lost and you fail it. Doomed. Now, doomed, your dying value, which you die, is reduced by your doomed value. Your max dying value is reduced to 0. You instantly die. When you die, you're no longer doomed. And your doom value decreases by 1 each time you get a full night's rest. So this gives rules already here for how to reduce your doomed and what it does. So, similar to death saves, you have a dying value. As your dying value increases, and you reach the end, it is a condition we'll talk about in a second, you die. So we'll talk about that. But doomed is basically magical attempts to cause you to die faster. Drained, of course, we kind of mentioned it's drained life force. It's a status penalty on constitution-based checks and fortitude. You lose a number of hit points, and your maximum hit points goes down by that. Yeah. And by full night's rest, you recover it. And the hit points lost to it by decreasing the value by 1. You become drained. Now, dying and death rules come up here. There are more rules to it, but dying is a condition you get. You are technically unconscious. Another condition. That's why a lot of these conditions stack. That bigger conditions will have smaller conditions that you can get from other things under it. You can be unconscious without dying. But in this case, when you're dying, you are also unconscious. They're kind of combining them together. It makes sense. It's always a value. If it reaches 4, you die. Hey, if you've doomed, it reduces that value you have to reach to die. You can start a recovery check. Basically, we won't talk about a recovery check here. I think I've mentioned it before. But it's the idea of similar to 5e, where you're making the check to see if you get better or worse with recovery check. If you fail the recovery check, your dying increases by 1. If also you take damage, it increases by 1. If you take a crit damage, it increases by 2. And if you recover from the dying condition by succeeding a recovery check, you're still at 0 hit points and unconscious. And if you lose the dying condition, automatically wake up. You lose dying and automatically wake up if you have 1 hit point. So anytime you lose dying, you gain Wounded 1, which the Wounded condition we'll talk about, but it acts very similar to the Doomed condition. So Doomed and Wounded stack. Encumbered is a condition. You have too much weight. You're carrying more than you can manage. You just get Clumsy 1. Hey, remember we talked about Clumsy. And status penalty. And as long as you have your encumbrance, you are clumsy. It doesn't go away. So we're getting this up here, but it's not going away. Reduce your speed too. Enfeebled, you're weakened. You get status penalties on strength-based things, strength attack rolls, strength damage, athletics. It's the strength-based things. We already had the constitution-based drain. Now this is the strength-based drain. Fascinated. You're distracted. You take penalties to status and skill, perception and skill checks. You can't concentrate during this time. There are consequences sometimes when you gain a fascinated condition, and there are things that you can't do during that time. It ends if a creature uses hostile action against you or your allies. Pretty simple. You're distracted. You really can't do anything. Fatigued. You're tired. You get penalties. You get rid of it for the full night's rest. Flat-footed. Flat-footed is one that comes up a lot. There are plenty of things that give you flat-footed. It is probably one of the most important ones that you're going to want to know about, because not only you, but your enemies can get it. It gives you a -2 penalty to your AC, and then things that take advantage of flat-footed can be used against you. I'm going to tell you the main thing that can be used for flat-footed is good old rogue sneak attack. It's one of the things that it likes to have is flat-footed, because if something is flat-footed, knife goes in a lot easier. So, whatever circumstance or condition gave you flat-footed kind of defines when it goes away. So, however you got the flat-footed, it will also define how it goes away there. It depends on it, since flat-footed is one of those ones you're going to have to hit a lot. And as we're going through these, I'm going to pause for a second and say, like, look, there is a lot here when it comes to conditions. And are you going to have to remember all of them? No. But you should very least be familiar with important ones, like flat-footed, like dying, like wounded. And also, you're going to have to understand the ones that your character can cause. Or ones that you feel like, because of the situation you're going to be in, will likely hit your character. Remember, we talked about things like drained. If I'm told we're going to be in a campaign that has a lot of undead, undead are one of the creatures that tend to have a lot of draining attacks. I'm going to want to kind of have an understanding and know about these. So familiarize yourself with what you need. As a GM, you should be generally familiar with all of them and kind of read through these. Don't need to necessarily remember them, but having something like this on Archives of Nethys that you can quickly look at helps. There are places in the book that also help. I believe there is an entire conditional chart here too. But the Archives is a very great place to use in place of it. Because there is need a condition appendix here that talks a lot about these different conditions and goes into them. It's the other place that you're kind of going to look for these two things. Fleeing. Something forces you to run away. And my book fell down. Of course it did. Knocked down my drink. Fortunately, it didn't spill. But I'll pour a little bit more while we talk here. You're running away. Is it fear? Is it compulsion? Something's causing you to run away. It's kind of as simple as that. You have to use all your actions to flee as much as possible. Open doors, move around things, get away. And the source of the fleeing will give you more details on how it works in that situation. Friendly. Friendly is an interesting one because it's an attitude-based condition. And automatically, this tends to be caused, it can be from a supernatural effect like a spell. It could be that you're just liked, or it could be something that you've caused through, say diplomacy. Regardless, your being friendly with someone means you can try to make a request of them. If you use hostile actions, it can reduce the attitude, basically. And the make a request can be at very little cost because, honestly, they like you. It's just a simple way of defining in a condition what is already kind of defined as part of a lot of diplomatic things. Making a condition doesn't make it anything worse than it is. It's just basically, in a way, combining and streamlining things or attempting to do so. Yes, does it need to be conditioned? Honestly, no. Diplomatic attitudes probably don't need to be. They occur and are something that you kind of keep track of as part of, let's say, Pathfinder 1st Edition. I would keep track if something was friendly, unfriendly, hostile, and all that stuff. You'd probably track similar attitudes in 5e or any other D&D edition as people have attitudes there. Making a condition just is a way of, like, saying, like, you know, this is what it is. It's part of this entire list. It's streamlined into one thing of there are conditions, you know. We're putting them all together in one place, in a way, rather than spreading them out throughout a book. Frightened, of course, you're filled with fear. You get penalty checks to all your checks and DCs. At the end of your turns, unless specified, the fright condition decreases by 1. So already, frightened defines very easily where it reduces. Every turn, it goes down by 1. Unless it does say this exactly, unless specified by whatever's causing it. Some other things may say, like, it's difficult to reduce this frightened. Grabbed. You're flat-footed and immobilized. Hey, 2 other conditions. But also, you can attempt to manipulate option while grab. You must succeed a flat DC 5 check or being lost. And you spend the action before the effect is done. So, like, it gives you 2 things. It makes it that a manipulate option is difficult, but that is a grab situation. Helpful. You're no longer friendly. You are helpful. It's another attitude one. This is the most friendly you can be, the best attitude you can have. If you get someone helpful for them, basically, you can give them a reasonable request, and they'll be willing to do that. And semi-reasonable requests might need a little bit more negotiation, or difficult ones, yes, but still. Hidden. The positive kind of thing is you're hidden from another creature. The creature knows this is an important one, because this is an important part of hidden. The creature knows the space you are in, but can't tell precisely where you are. That's an important part of the hidden condition. And that's why when we were talking about things like hidden, observe, undetected, it makes a difference, because each of them defines something differently. This is, I know where you're at. I can't see you there, though. You've gotten out of my sight. I know you haven't left that spot, but I can't tell exactly where you are. Yeah. A creature you're hidden from is flat-footed to you and must succeed a DC 11 flat check to target with attack or spell. Because they can do something to that area, they have basically a 50-50 chance of affecting you. And that is an important part of hidden. It makes it that you are still semi-detected. You are not completely undetected. It's just they can't tell exactly where you are. So that's what you have to remember, it's the degree of nuance in this case, and it does make a difference to understand the difference between hidden and something like undetected. In this case, it still knows there's something hostile there, or something it can target. Hostile, of course, another attitude one. It hates the crap out of you. It won't accept respect, and probably seeks to harm those you harm. Immobilized. You can't do any action with the move trait. Again, traits, the other important thing we're talking about today. But if you have the move trait, you can't do it. You're being held in place, and external force is doing something. If the force must succeed at a check against you, that's against the effect that's holding you in place, in order to move you out of it. So if something's holding you down and something else is pushing you, it has to make a DC check against that force that's holding you in order to push you. Indifferent, the neutral attitude, of course. They don't really care about you one way or the other. Invisible. You can't be seen. You're undetected. Creatures can attempt to detect you. If it makes its check, which is a perception against your stealth DC, you're hidden. There you go. Now there's the important difference between undetected and hidden, and it's coming into play with invisible. It makes a difference because you start out as undetected. Something can take a seek action to try to notice you. And if they do, they can target your square or target you with a 50-50 chance of hitting you. And you can sneak to become undetected again. Because it's very easy with the invisible to get out of the way. So if you do become invisible while someone can already see you, be sort of as hidden against the observer until you sneak. And you can't become observed while invisible except via special magic and abilities. So there we go. Observed becomes, that's when somebody sees you. Again, these different levels of things are quickly defining in a combat situation with these conditions, which honestly are things that are going to be very natural in your games. I think that's the other thing that I kind of want to talk about with these conditions is that keeping track of them isn't always critical, and it only comes down to the GM is going to have a general idea of them more than the players. That's where the importance of it for a GM comes to mind. You're going to, as the GM, want to know who's observed, who's undetected, who's hidden, who's invisible. Will these things have different effects? Yes, they have effects against each other. And certainly, if everybody's observed, it doesn't matter. If everybody's undetected, it doesn't matter. If attitudes are this way, it doesn't matter sometimes. It's meant to be ready for situational things and set up rules for situations, and that's why these conditions are here and are important, even though a lot of them feel sometimes a little, honestly, redundant. Observed is one of those conditions where you're going to have it a lot, honestly. People can see you. You can try to do stuff like making stealth to hide, where you can become hidden or undetected instead of observed. But again, it's got rules for it. So, yeah. Paralyzed, frozen in place. You have flat-footed condition and can't act except recall knowledge, where actions only require your mind, as determined by the DM. Senses still function, but only as you can perceive without moving your body, so you can't seek while paralyzed. There you go. Pretty simple. You're flat-footed. Persistent damage. Persistent damage, as you can see, has a little bit of extra rules to it. And the reason behind that is you have something like you're being on fire, you've been dipped in acid that's still burning you. It appears as X persistent type of damage. X is the amount of damage is dealt. Type is the amount of damage, the type of damage is dealing. It can be doubled or halved as a result of an attack or saving throw, like normal damage. So, like if I criticaled you and it doubles damage, the persistent damage is doubled. And you take it at the end of each of your turns as long as you have the condition. That's the rules for it. So it's not something you get immediately. It's, I'm on fire. At the end of my turn, I take that damage. And you roll the damage each time. And it's a flat DC 15 check to recover from persistent damage. After you take the damage. So I'm on fire. I get to take my turn. I don't really get anything extra from it. But afterwards, I can do it. Now, there's the extra rules for persistent damage because it is something that happens. They say, like here, persistent damage damage runs its course and automatically ends after a certain amount of time. GM determines it, usually a minute. So it's sort of like, you on fire, your person sort of flammable, honestly, if you survive long enough, you probably could go out. If you're doing stuff, acid only burns for so long, you only bleed for so long, and then it stops and your blood, stops. You can get assistance to get the recovery. They've got rules for that. There are immunities, resistances, and weaknesses, which will apply if you have it. If I'm weak to fire, I'll take extra fire damage from being on fire. And you can have multiple types of conditions as long as they are different damage types. If they're the same damage type, the higher amount overrides the lower amount. And they occur all at once. So, yes. And the thing is, again, they do mention it, which is very nice. If you have multiple types of persistent damage, if you're bleeding on fire and covered in acid, If since they affect you all at the same time at the end of your turn, you would only gain dying 1 if they're dropped to dying, rather than dying. I'm screwed because they're all hitting one after another. No, they're nice that they all hit at once. So only get dying 1. Only die 1 extra turn per each round for that. Petrified, you're turned to stone. I love how this is an important thing about it. You have a bulk double your normal bulk. Usually 12 for petrified medium creature, 6 for petrified small creature. I just got to some stats. Current hit points is one you had when you were alive. You don't have a broken threshold. When you turn back to flesh, you have the exact same number of hit points you had as a statue. If it's destroyed, you're to die immediately. Your mind and body are in stasis. You don't age or notice the passage of time. Petrified conditions will tell you how they add. But petrified. Prone. You're on the ground. You're flat-footed with a circumstance penalty to attack rolls. The only move you can take is to crawl or stand. Stand against the prone condition. And it gives you some rules for taking cover. And of course, if you're knocked prone by climbing and flying, you fall. And you can't be knocked prone while swimming. Pretty open there. Can't be prone while swimming. Climbing and flying, when knocking prone, make you drop. And you're just on the ground and flat-footed. Here's where flat-footed becomes important. Hey, I'm prone, I'm flat-footed, and I also get a penalty to my attack. My movements are limited. Quickened. Here's one that can come up, especially like as I've been doing Pathfinder First Editions come up. It's haste. This is basically the haste ability. You gain 1 extra action at the start of your round. Haste itself as the spell does a little bit more, but it gives you the quickened condition. And again, these are extra actions. And the thing is, the quickened, whatever gives you it, will specify what these additional actions can be. It will say if you can just use attacks, if you can use it for moves, if you can use it for this. It will kind of define that. And since quicken is the start of a turn, if I quicken myself during my turn, I don't immediately gain my actions. That's an important part that they do mention here. If I quicken myself during my turn, or I get quickened during my turn, it's not going to give me actions right there. So, we haven't talked about them, but there are ways to lose actions. Similar, there's ways of gaining actions. The conditions that alter the amount of actions at the beginning of your turn, it doesn't adjust during the middle of your turn. If you have conflicting conditions that affect the number of actions, you choose what actions you lose. That's an important thing to note. So if I get the stunned condition or the slowed condition and I would lose some actions, I could say I lose the extra action from haste, which you can only strike or stride, attack or move. So I chose that to get rid of that. There are other rules for other actions. If you get into the situation, at least they have this excerpt here to talk about it for. Restrained. It's kind of like being grappled, except worse. You're kind of pinned, you can barely move. Not only are you flat-footed, now you're immobilized. You can't make move actions. You can't use the actions with the attack or manipulate, trick, escape, or force open bonds. It overrides grabbed. So it's restrained is the higher version of grabbed. So once again, we have an override here going over it. Sickened. You feel ill. It's a value. Take a status penalty on all checks and DCs. You can't ingest anything like elixirs or potions while sickened. You can only take you can spend a single action attempting to recover. It lets you make a fortitude save against the DC of the effect that made you sickened. If you succeed, you reduce the sickened value by 1 or 2 on a critical success. That's the important thing is, you might have to take a number of these actions to reduce your sickened condition. If I have sickened 3, I will have to make 3 checks, 3 actions to reduce my sicken to 0. And that's if I succeed on all of them. A critical success speeds that up. If not, that's the way you get rid of sickened. Again, it's built in here how you get rid of it. Slowed is you lose an action at the start of your turn. It reduces the number of actions. So it's like at the start of the turn, I recover all my actions. That's the important part of this. It's like you have to think about it that way. Is my actions refresh at the start of my turn? Slowed reduces that value. Similar to like a quicken effect will increase that value. And the thing is, because slowed has affected start of a turn, if you become slowed during your turn, doesn't matter. We're getting towards the end of these here. We got stunned. Become senseless. You can't act while you are stunned. It's a value. Stunned is a number of actions you lose, possibly over multiple turns, possibly over one turn. If I get stunned 2, I lose 2 actions. If I get stunned 3, I would lose all of my actions on a turn. I have to wait till next turn to do stuff. They give the example here. If you're stunned 4, you lose a turn of actions, and then you have 1 extra stun still left over for your next turn to lose 1 more action. So as you lose actions, your stun value goes down. It's pretty simple than that. It overrides slowed. It's the important part of stunned. So the duration of stun conditions ends while you were slowed. You count the actions lost during the stun condition towards the loss of being slowed. That's an important thing. So, remember, we talked about slowed. It usually has a reduction, you know. So they're saying, like, if I've stunned 1 and slowed 2 at the beginning of your turn, I would lose 9 action for stunned and only lose 1 additional action for being slowed. So if you have 1 action remaining for your... okay. The stunned and slowed, it means that, like, if the slowed value tells you how many actions you lose from being slowed, right? If I'm slowed 3, I can't move at all. But if I'm slowed 1 or 2, if I'm stunned 1, it reduces 1 of my actions for the turn. My slowed 2, the slowed 2 only becomes a slowed 1 for that turn because I already lost my action. That's the easy way of saying it. Stupefied. It's a value. It is, remember, we've already had our strength and our constitution penalty kind of abilities. This is your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma combined. Guess what? It kind of sucks for all those. It's all the mental ones. And when you cast a spell, it's disrupted with a flat DC 5 check plus your stupefied value. So the more you're stupefied, the harder it is to cast spells. But it's a penalty to a bunch of stuff. All your mental stats being stupefied. Unconscious. You're sleeping or been knocked out. It gives you a bunch of penalties. You're blinded, you're flat-footed, you're prone, you know, if you're unconscious because you're dying, you can't wake up while you have 0 hit points. You know, after certain time of tasks, if you've been at 0 and you're not dying, after some time passes, you do return to 1. It's usually 10 minutes to several hours, depending on what happened to you. If you receive healing, you lose unconsciousness. If you have more than 1 hit points, you lose unconsciousness from... if your unconsciousness have more than 1 hit point, like if you're asleep, there's another bunch of ways that can wake you up, as listed here. There you go. But basically, unconscious is the extreme version of I'm down and out for the count. And it's combining a bunch of other status effects, blinded and flat-footed, along with some additional penalties. So this way, I can look at these other 2 conditions, see I have both of these, but I also add in some additional conditions. It's another way that these stacking conditions doesn't have to list all the penalties you're getting. I don't have to have this, like, bajillion page thing for unconscious of all the penalties I have. I know I have these penalties and a couple extra conditions. Undetected. Hey, not only can't they see you, they don't know you're there. It's flat-footed to you. It can guess a square that you're in if it knows there's an enemy nearby. Like if you're invisible and have been fighting something and you manage to get out of the way, it can kind of like guess a square and then roll a flat check to see if it hits you, that kind of thing. That can work as an enemy too if it's in a way. And you can try a seek check to try to find it. So it's the most extreme form of I can't see something there. That undetected, though, means it knows there's an enemy somewhere. It just doesn't know where it's at, and it can't see it. Unfriendly, on the other hand, last attitude one we're going to look at here, you know, it doesn't like you. It dislikes you, distrusts you. It's not going to probably do anything hostile towards you because it doesn't really need to, but it really doesn't like you. Unnoticed. Here is the most extreme form of notice, because not only are you also undetected, it doesn't know you're there at all. That's it. It's completely unaware of you. It will just go about its business. It's not trying to attack you. It's not doing anything. Unnoticed is the one where it just doesn't know you're there. You go from unnoticed to undetected, to hidden, to, of course, detected. You know, wounded. Our last bit on the dying tree. Remember we talked about that if you recover from dying, you get the wounded condition, which reduces the amount of dying condition that you need to die later on. Hey, I recovered, but I've got a wound. And then later on, if I get the wounded condition again, or the dying condition again, I've got wounded 1, I die at dying 3 then. So, certainly, if you gain the dying condition while wounded, yeah. So, I mean, but if you get dying 4, it's instant death. Think about that. Dying 4 would be instantly dying. Or wounded 4 means as soon as you get to die, you die instantly. Wounded 3 is pretty close, because you start at wounded 3. Actually, no, I think I would reduce it. Wounded 3 is enough to kill you, because it reduces the value to 1, and when you get a dying 1, yeah, so wounded 3 is the death value. Sorry. Did my math wrong there for a second. Wounded condition has if someone restores hit points to you, or treats wounds, if they restore hit points with treat wounds, not magic, or if you're full hit points and rest for 10 minutes, you get rid of the wounded condition. Those are 2 important things to note. That means treat wounds becomes more important because the wounded condition doesn't go away with healing magic, normally. If I cast the heal spell, it doesn't remove wounded. I can get you up from being unconscious and dying, but you still gain wounded and it doesn't go away. And I have to use treat wounds and restore hit points with you, or heal you to full hit points and allow you to get 10 minutes of rest to basically take like a kind of short rest to recover that wounded condition. As you can see from all these conditions, they don't necessarily gel as easy as the conditions that we would look at in other editions. The other editions' conditions are kind of like a little bit more targeted in a way. And yes, I do agree. This is a great idea for this thing. Is it a little clunky? I always feel like this is a little clunky, but it's a great idea that isn't terrible. The clunkiness comes to some of these things feel a little unusual to be conditions. And yeah, attitude conditions, that's probably the weirdest out of those ones. And the degrees of detection do feel a little like out there, but if you break down the degrees of detection, it makes sense. It kind of defines how a combat goes to a degree, and assigning those to something as a condition makes it very easy to quickly understand. I can take note of what enemy has what condition when coming to a battle, and very easily I've said this, and this for detections. I know how creatures react to each other right away. Similarly speaking, attitude can be useful to keep track of because it can keep track of how NPCs are reacting. I can note these things with conditions and have an idea about it. Again, is it necessary? That's an argument that's really hard to say. The idea that Pathfinder 2nd Edition brings in here with its conditions is it kind of tries to make everything under one branch of information. And making it under a branch of information, in a way, streamlines it. There is a complexity to the conditions chart, much more so than Pathfinder 1st Edition or D&D 5e conditions. This is more complex than them. But you have to remember, we've brought in stuff from other locations under conditions. So we've streamlined a bunch of other things into conditions. And yes, custom markers and good ways and VTTs are probably really good ways to keep track of conditions. Something like Pathfinder 1st Edition is actually really good at that. If you haven't noticed, and especially last night was a great way of noticing, the Pathfinder 1st edition character sheets have an entire thing where you can mark a condition and its effects are put onto a sheet. Pathfinder 2nd edition sheets, the one that I normally use, has something similar to mark conditions. I haven't tested around to see if the penalties and stuff really apply as well. It probably does. But both of those sheets are very good at marking conditions. This is something that I think, I don't know if 5e has for their character sheets of VTTs. But in general, this makes an advantage for the online systems, especially a lot of other VTTs, Roll20 and others, can track these things very easily. Even in a game, the conditions can help you track things a lot, and simply noting numbers and stuff down keeps an idea of penalties and stuff. Yes, tracking it in pen and paper and in-person stuff is a bit of a challenge. Certainly. But there are places usually on your sheet to mark some of these things. And have, again, as I said, ones that mainly affect your character, and certain ones like, let's say, flat-footed, which is going to come up, just knowing flat-footed is great. Remember what flat-footed is? Flat-footed is -2 penalty to AC. It's really simple. It's something that anybody can remember. And it'd be like, I'm flat-footed, I get -2 to my AC. And then, if I'm flat-footed, something can take advantage of it. If it happens. It might not. It might just be something that makes you flat-footed. Maybe it doesn't have any kind of rogue-like abilities. But these make it easier in a way. These are also much more streamlined in comparison to the way they work than earlier editions. Anything from 3rd edition D&D to Pathfinder 1st edition, there were a lot of conditions and values that were very complex. Things like ability drain and ability damage, level drain and stuff. Guess what? It's kind of gone and changed. Now we have things like enfeebled or drained. And certainly, other things might have different rules on their sheets where they give these abilities that they call things. But we can keep track of this stuff and note it and throw it out there very quickly and very easily. And, clumsy, the dex-based one. So we've got dex, constitution, strength, and of course, mental stats. You have, in quotations, ability score reductions, but they are a condition. And they have rules how they work. And it's very simplified. And I don't have to change my ability scores at all. Man, I got clumsy for this period of time. I got enfeebled for this period of time. I've got stupefied for this period of time. I've got drained for this period of time. I get penalties to the things I do with this. I don't change my ability scores. Conditions are going to be important. I would, even as a player, just read over them once at least. Get yourself familiar with some of the conditions. As a GM, you're going to have to know them. Down pat? No. But certainly you're going to be familiar with a lot of them, and there's plenty of them that you're going to be using. And I would be ready to reference something like this. This will, in the end, make it easier for you. This is a system that requires a little bit of practice, I think. As I said, we're streamlining a lot of stuff, but into a little bit more of a complex system. So it's a little clunkier, a little bit more complex. It takes a little bit to get a hold of the condition system, a lot more than some of the other ones. But in the end, result will be, with a little bit of practice, it becomes a lot easier. As we are familiar, this is one of those advantages that, even with older editions and stuff, as you become familiar, you still have a certain level of difficulty with it. This just streamlines all that as you become familiar and makes it easier on the long term, definitely, over the short term. That is why there's a big advantage in the way that the conditions work here. It's got a little bit more of the uptick on difficulty at first, from my personal experience. Everybody might be different. If you're really good at memorizing these things or getting down pat, good on you. But for me, it was a little bit of like a ramp up, but then it skinned out. That was my experience with them. And so I feel like, again, it depends on how well you learn and, get a hold of them. We all have different ways that we learn and understand them. But just know there's a lot to hit you at first. And then it becomes that kind of streamlined understanding, especially knowing the ones that you cause or get normally affected by. And some of these, honestly, like the attitude ones, the degrees of detection, they kind of are very easy to become down pat. It's a very easy thing to think about between unnoticed, undetected, observed, and hidden. That's really easy to understand the difference between, honestly. And even the attitude ones, it's very easy to understand kind of where we stand. So we're already cutting down the other things. And like the dying stuff, honestly, doomed might not come up a lot. Unconscious is pretty obvious, and that's just the dying and wounded conditions that are really going to be important. And we've already gone through 3/5 of the stuff here, with a couple other extra ones that are not part of the groups. But we've gone through over half of it just there, and the numbers broken down was making a bunch of them just easier. The lowered abilities, kind of just understanding where all 4 of them at, makes it easier. The senses one makes it just a general idea of where they are, makes it easier. You get a familiarity. Anyway, we have one other big topic to talk about today. And it was another one that you've seen already, is related to this, but is also related to other stuff. And this is one that I'm going to talk about for a little bit here, but it's up to you to look into these more. And why am I talking that it's up to you to look into these more? Well, there's a good reason behind it. Traits. This is another very large part of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We've talked about how, in general, how your character acts and how things are affecting your character, that's your conditions. Traits. We've talked about them. We've talked about them when we've talked about ancestries and classes. We've talked about them when we've talked about skills and skill feats. I've talked about them loosely when I talked a little bit about spells. Monsters. All of these things have traits. What do traits mean to me? Certainly, something like a class has a number of traits related to it. These traits could be exactly the class. They could be a class trait. What do they define? Spells, abilities, monsters, items, various rules things have traits connected to them. What traits do is indicate a general rule of how something works and how they interact with each other. That's what a trait is. Let's take an example. Let's take a look at one here. A cantrip trait. If I see a cantrip trait here, it means the spell will automatically heighten to half of your level rounded up. That's what a cantrip trait means. It tells a bunch of focus spells and spells that are cantrips. But if I come up with something that's either custom or a monster that has an ability and it has the cantrip trait, I know whatever the monster's effective level is, its challenge, half of that is where that ability is heightened to. And if something else gets that ability, I would have the definition of it. Also, anything that talks about or defines cantrips are connected to it. Now, this top part here, all of these up here at the top, as you can see my mouse highlighting them, these are the general ones that you might want to take a look at. Are you going to need to take a look at all of these? No. But you should become familiar with traits that are on your character sheet. Certainly, your ancestry and your class are traits. They're your traits. Meaning, if I am an android cleric, anything that talks about androids and anything that talks about clerics instantly link to me because I have those traits. If I'm playing, let's give an example here, let's open up a class here. Let's open up an alchemist for a second here. Key terms: additive and infused. Now, those are class specific traits. Additive, and I think infused is also one in here. That might be into equipment traits. Having to find out where they are in all these things is not always easy. That might also be where they're listed here. But think about that already. We see that as a class trait. And alchemist is maybe the best one. But like someone has a flourish. I think barbarians or fighters have a flourish. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. But already you know that key term shows up a lot. So I might want to like open up flourish and see what a flourish does. And already it says here, flourish requires too much exertion. You can only use one flourish trait action with one flourish trait per turn. Already defining flourish there means that anything on any class that has flourish, I know what it kind of has an idea of what it does. I can use only one per turn, even if it's no matter how many actions it takes. If it takes one action, still can only do one flourish a turn. A lot of these traits are simple. They just define groups. But the important part about traits here is it is creating complex groupings and making things a lot easier. If I know something affects a good something rather, hey, there's a good trait. If it affects good creatures, maybe the creature has a good trait. If it affects good magic, a weapon or item or spell could have the good trait. And so you're seeing already why traits are very important. Now, other than this little list here, which ends up being a little bit more general, these ones here that you don't really need to be 100% familiar with, but you should take a look at them. These first group of traits here. I would definitely recommend taking a look at this and just understanding what all this means to a degree. Because as soon as we get into, let's open up another tab here. All feats, we'll open up that. And honestly, where are you? Spells. It's under spell. I can't remember where they put spells and rituals. There we go. Let's open up a feat. Let's open up a where are we at? All feats. Let's open up additional lore. Already I can see it's a general and skill traits. And we know general, a type of feat. So we already know it's defined as a type of feat when it's general. And skill, a type of general feat that has the skill trait imposed on it. That means it's connected to a certain skill. We take a look at spells. Let's just take a look at we'll take a look at a cantrip here for a second. We'll take a look at days. Cantrip, enhancement, mental, non-lethal. Already, this is all defining things. What it does. If we look at a normal spell, let's take the fear spell. Emotional, enchantment, fear, mental. Has no effect on an obelisk or mindless creature. Effects with the trait always have the mental and emotion traits as well. So, already, since it gives the mental specifically, it also says that, like, this also has the emotion trait, which it doesn't list. But it's giving another trait, and it's breaking down how all these things are interconnected. And knowing, like, something is mental is great for you. Let's break down just the traits lists here other than general. We have the alignment ones, ancestry ones. Those are pretty open. AP-specific ones are adventure path-specific ones. Armor traits. These are traits you would have on your armor. Hindering, flexible, comfort. These traits would define other abilities other than just its armor. You have to think about these traits as extra bonuses depending on the armor it has. Class traits just says you are this, whatever it is of this class. Class-specific traits, on the other hand, are ones that are related to certain ones. Like Cursebound relates to oracles, but is a trait that isn't the oracle trait. It does, as we kind of click on Cursebound here, it specifically spells, this trait increases the severity of the oracle's curse when cast. Usually, remember, Spacian spells have this track. You can't cast a Cursebound spell if you don't have an oracular curse. So that set of rules means very important things. Because if I don't have a curse, and I somehow from another source gain a curse-bound spell, I can't cast it. Just because I have that, I don't have the curse. It automatically things, Creature type traits, of course. This gives us the general idea of how something works. If I click on this, it tells me some basic rules of undead. Right here. It tells me the basic rules of a creature. Elemental, of course, if something has an element related to it. And this can be various different sources. It can be a creature. It can be a fire source. It can be a plane. It can be a damage type. Similarly, the elemental... And the thing is, all these things have the elemental trait of fire. But you can see energy trait is also very similar. It is also that too. So some of these have like the fire and fire here are both an elemental trait and energy trait. Otherwise, they are separate. Like there's a water trait, and water trait doesn't relate to cold trait. Equipment traits. These are traits that you can have on equipment. If you have a scroll, a potion, a mutagen, invested, an intelligent thing, a trap, a wand, hazards. That's kind of coming into an environmental trait. Again, things have defined traits. That's an easy way of looking and seeing how they relate to each other. Kingdom traits, kingdom event traits, kingdom settlement traits, kingdom warfare traits, monster traits, which are specific groups of monsters that can be kind of put together, planar traits for planar traveling, poison traits for types of poisons, rarity traits, which we've already seen stuff on rarity when we were talking about ancestries and also feats in general and classes too. There was a bit of rarity that came up. School traits, when we were looking at spells, that was something that came up. It relates to the scroll. Senses traits. This kind of tells you that an action or something has a visual, olfactory, or auditory component to it. Remember when we talked about deafened and its auditory things, or blinded with its visual things? Hey, here's where the traits come in. Here's where the traits are important. When you're either blinded or deafened or dazzled or stuff like that, then the senses traits become important, because then you can know how a skill, spell, or ability will react with that person, or the person's use of it will react. Settlement traits for size of cities, shield traits for shields, which are different than armor, tradition traits, because, hey, you've got your different traditions, variant rules traits, which are traits there, and, of course, the weapons traits, which are actually something that you kind of want to look at sometimes, too, depending on things, because that's kind of stuff like, oh, hey, deadly, where it does more damage on a critical hit. Or, where is the one I'm looking for in this list? Versatile. It can do different types of damage and stuff like that. And finesse, where you can use your dex mod instead of your strength with this weapon when calculating attack. Not damage, but attack, at least. So just generally having a finesse weapons means you can use the dex to attack. So, again, traits come up in a lot of places. And these topic traits, some of them might come up more than others. If you're wearing very simple armor or not wearing armor at all, you may not have a lot of armor traits. If you're using a very simple weapon, you might not have a lot of weapon traits. Your class will probably have some traits that you'll have to know about. Creature trait type traits and monster traits, that might be something you don't need. Elemental and the way that they generally work, that's kind of be one that, in general, again, maybe. Equipment traits are kind of another one of those maybes that you might know about. The kingdom ones, a lot of like the settlement ones, that's dependent on your adventure. Shield, to use a shield. The magic spells, knowing their traits are very important. Again, as I said, the census traits are very important ones to keep track of. So it's a matter of all these breaking down when it comes to things and having these traits. Is it always that important? I'm gonna kind of say no. But breaking it down this way and having these traits, we are doing something that is what I talked about with the conditions. We are, in a way, streamlining everything by adding complexity. It's exactly the same thing. Already, if I define something as a skill feat with the skill trait, it's a general feat with the skill trait improves your skills and the actions and gives you new actions with a skill. And it can be granted by a feat with this trait can be selected when a class grants a skill feat or a general feat. So it makes it that not all general feats are skill feats, but all skill feats are general feats. It automatically is defined right here. A skill feat is a general feat, and it tells you the 2 times you can take it. A general feat is a feat of type that can be selected regardless of ancestry or class as long as you meet the prerequisite. And you can select a feat with this trait when your class grants you a general feat. Defining that, we break down our skill and our feat list automatically, very quickly, and allow us to look at stuff and understand it. It allows us to categorize things quickly and efficiently. And I think that's what a lot of this does. Think about the traits for traditions. If I have the primal tradition trait, the primal trait, it's magical, and it's connected to the primal tradition. It's connected to primal spells. It's connected to druids. It's connected to rangers and things like that. And automatically I have an idea of breaking down something that's very broad into a shorter thing. By combining a, let's say, monster trait and a creature trait, I'm giving a larger topic of a creature and then giving a specific group under those. And that group, let's say something like a kaiju, you know. There's not really a lot on it because there's not a lot of kaiju. There's some kaiju hazards, which are related to kaiju's monsters, as you can see. And they are very rare. Swatting tail. Mogur's tail sweeps forward. Yeah. And so it kind of screams out, that's related to this specific monster or something, or this type of creature, using it, things like that. We're breaking things down in ways and categorizing them. And there are a lot of categories. But we break down those categories quickly and efficiently, making note of a lot of these. You know, a hazardous, a weather hazard. You know, a mechanical hazard for trap. A hazard where this trait is constructed physical object, where they give equipments and hazards which are like traps. A weather event is a type of hazard that plays out exploration mode rather than encounter mode. See? It defines things here. And it defines stuff that happens for hazards. It breaks down the idea of a hazard with things, and then I can add other traits in to those hazards to kind of define it and break it down even more. We are defining things in a way. And this definition is important. It's complex. Do I have to know everything? Heck, no. There is so much here that you would possibly want to remember. Do I even have to know some of the stuff that's on this list? No. I've got to be honest, some of these, let's say like I click on a wand here. Wand is a single spell which you can cast once a day. Okay. You know what? Do I have to remember that? Not really. But it's very easy. A potion. A magical liquid activated when you drink it. That's a kind of obvious one. But already I've said like, oh, if I have a wand, I can use it once a day. If I have a potion, I drink it to get an effect. These are things that like, these traits define it. That this is a potion, or this is a wand. And it gives you a general idea that it could be named something else entirely. the liquid of regeneration. It has the potion type, and I'm like, oh, it's a potion. I chug it down, and I get its effect. Or the iron stick of iron rod of doom, and it has the wand trait. You're like, oh, it's a wand. I can cast a spell from it once a day. See, these things give us an idea generally how things work. And yes, equipment traits, or weapon traits, or armor traits, or shield traits, if I'm using something that has one of those, knowing my traits is very helpful. If I'm playing a certain class, knowing my traits is helpful. My class-based traits, or my general traits that I get from that class. Knowing the type of traits that my abilities have, at least reviewing them once, and knowing if there's something I have to note in my brain is helpful. Some of these you do want to keep track of, because it might come up. Noting on your character sheet, whether it's on Roll20 or in person, what your abilities' traits are when you make note of them. Or just as a little bit of an idea, gives you an idea to quickly look up something and get an idea how things interact very rapidly. It gives you a reference source. And certainly in this case, I think Archives of Nethys is a lot better than our friend here, where if I try to look up, I think I can look up traits, but it's not quite the same way. I don't know if there's a full trait list in here. There might not be. Trait, keyword. There's an appendix. Individual traits appear by name in this appendix, and then there's armor and weapon traits. So that's the thing is, armor and weapon traits are separate, but a lot of the other traits that might shows up in the appendix in the back of the book, where you can kind of look through them inferiorly. So it is still like a decent alphabetical reference. So like if I wanted to look up exploration, I could find exploration trait right here. It's hard to see because I'm holding up a book, but it's right there on the book under the list. It's very tiny words, honestly, but it basically, you can look it up and know what these traits are. And again, you can make note very easily when you're making your character or leveling up your character what traits you might need to look up. Or, like if something's a little complex or something might have an interaction with another trait. Like, remember our fear? Effects of this trait always have the mental and emotional traits as well. Already, I'm taking a look at mental, where it can affect an object or a mindless creature, and emotional effects of the trait always have the mental trait as well. Creatures with special training or have mechanism of artificial intelligence are immune to emotional attacks. There you go. It automatically defines things between these I can't normally target right away. That, that creature doesn't have to list it's immune to all this, because I know what fear effects are. And I know fears are mental and emotional, and I know my fear ability. Because of this, I can quickly look up what I can affect it with my emotional ability, with my fear ability, or my charm ability and how it works, my death ability, things like that. Knowing your traits and which ones are going to matter to you, and especially listing them, you can also learn during a campaign which ones you have to keep track of. If I'm in a campaign where my characters are generally good, and there's a lot of good effects, and we're fighting a lot of evil things with evil effects, good and evil alignments might matter. But because I note those traits, it becomes important. Now granted, these are creature things and stuff like that. But still, getting an idea when your traits, you're going to need to know them, what bonuses they might give, what effects they might have, knowing all of them are good. And again, similar to like when we talked about the spells. Quickly having these senses ones, the audio, olfactory, and visual, and abilities or spells that have those automatically defines for situations where blinded and deafened come up, or even dazzled. Those will come up. And so knowing your senses traits can be pretty important. Even things like settlement traits. Level no higher than 1. Level ranging from 2 to 4. Level from 5 to 7. Level 8 or higher. What does that mean? It kind of gives the average level for the things that are there. You know, usually in a village, everybody's level 1. Usually in a town, people tend to be from level 2 to 4 on average. On average, levels typically ranging from 5 to 7. Levels 8 or higher for Metropolis. This sentiment traits, again, we're defining stuff down. Tradition traits, variant rules traits, all these traits, we're defining and breaking down groups with these traits. And yes, there's a lot of stuff that you won't have trait. A monster's not going to have an equipment trait. A spell's not going to have an armor trait. Probably not. Unless you're summoning armor, which then it probably gives it to the armor you're summoning, honestly. A bard is not going to have a fighter trait. But a multi-class bard might. But that's a different entire story. Then we're getting into the multi-class trait. But if you don't have that, then no. So, traits are, like, again, I can't go over everything because there's so many traits here. And yes, most of these traits are pretty much just, I'm in this group. You know, that's pretty much it. If you're a human and you have the human trait, you're a human. There's not much else to define to it. You know, it's just a trait that you are human. It's an ability with this trait can only be selected by humans. That's an important part of it that it mentions there. And certainly, like, if you are a half-elf, or if you wanted to be something that's like a human catfolk and your DM allowed it for, like, the other rules for mixed ancestry people by some miracle of magic, you'd have both traits of those. So there is definitions, and these traits on your character, your equipment, your spells, your feats, your class abilities, all break down how everything interacts. It's a complexity that is also streamlining. That's what I mean by it. And that's the essence of Pathfinder 2nd Edition a lot, and why I kind of wanted to go into this deep kind of discussion on traits next to the conditions. Because both of these things are very important going forward. I will want to dive into talking about the general rules of combat and some general rules of magic at some point in time later on. These are things that I want to kind of give out there for people to know when you're using Pathfinder 2nd Edition. A basically breakdown on how these works. But a lot of these things in the future, which come down to playing the game, break down to, honestly, two sets of things. Conditions and traits. They form a backbone of the system. The conditions as things that affect your character as you play, and the traits as defining your character as it's built. So both of these are the two pillars of what understanding your character you have. And having a general knowledge of these is very good. Again, even with the conditions, you don't really have to memorize all of them. A general familiarity helps. The traits, a general familiarity of your traits helps. There are plenty of traits that are just, this is this. I'm a human. I'm a catfolk. I'm a dwarf. I'm a lizard folk. I'm an Orid. I'm a cleric. I'm a bard. I'm a fighter. Those are pretty simple. I'm multi-class. I have a general feat. I have a skill feat. I have a class-based ability. I have an archetype. All these very general, very simple. But some of them This is a fear effect. This is a polymorph effect. This is a flourish. Those give you an idea on specifically how this type of thing works, especially for your character. And knowing the traits your spells have, the traits your class abilities have, and of course, as I talked about classes, the traits you'd have as part of your class that comes up a lot, knowing them is important. I talked about it there because this was an introduction to the importance of traits, because they are a complex thing. You have a lot of times 3 or 4 traits built into everything. Should I list all of them? Yes. Do I need to know all of them? No. You do not. You don't have to memorize all of them. You don't have to have them all down pat. But being familiar with this stuff, being familiar with your traits, being familiar with your conditions, helps a lot. And as the GM, having something like this in Archives of Nethys will help a lot. And honestly, when I'm looking up a monster and I see what kind of traits it has, I can check to see if there's anything that I have to make note of that will affect when it interacts with my players. These traits will give me an idea right away. And then, if it causes conditions, I can look those up, to get an idea what those conditions do. And already now, I have defined a lot of what my creature does. Maybe it only stabs people with a sword. But any kind of traits it has gives me an idea, or where its traits or its abilities are, gives me ideas, how they work. Giving a journey and hazards traits, or towns traits, of various things, kingdoms traits, gives you an idea how they're broken down. And these traits are listed here, but certainly more rules on them are defined in various areas where we have kingdom and settlement rules, which do exist that you'd look up. But seeing these general traits and understanding them gives you an idea of where to go about with that. That's the kind of thing it is. The planar traits, honestly, if you get someone that's plane hopping, there are plenty of cool games which travel between planes. And knowing these traits of a plane right away, and I can look up and see what these do, it means that I can define different things. I can say, oh, it's got high gravity there. It's got low gravity there. I know what that does. And I know how it matches with other things. It's ordering things in chaos. So, I think that's probably a great area to leave it off there, honestly, because we really dove into some things which I felt like were, as I said, these are in a way important. They're important, but not critical in a way, too. That's the weird thing about it, is these two topics they come up. They are a very important part of your character and what your character does, but they're never going to be the critical break your back kind of things. A general skill feat is still a general skill feat. What it does makes a difference. My spells, what they do, regardless of traits, make a difference. Me, oftentimes causing, let's say, it's flat-footed, that might make a difference in attack rolls, but the attacks themselves and abilities that target the enemy are probably what's going to make more of a difference there. So these are a layer which do have importance, but they aren't the be-all, end-all. And having that familiarity, as I've talked about already, is very good to have, and you should. Beyond that, knowing that they are and understanding how they work and how you're going to have them, that's good. Hey, we didn't talk about it. There's a unique trait. There's one of a kind. There is a unique trait that exists. We talked about common, uncommon, and rare. We didn't talk about unique because players are probably not going to have unique. I'm going to tell you that. That would be a story thing. A player gets a unique ability or something. That's a story thing. Yeah, they're to help everybody be on board and be at a same level. That's why all of these are there. And again, this trait list, heck, you probably, as a DM or GM, only maybe need to know, like, a general idea of them and where traits come from. As a player, you know even less. And honestly, just remember, as long as you're playing that character, as soon as you start a new character, know your traits for that character. And same with, a lot of times, same with conditions. Having a general idea of them is fine. There's a lot to memorize here, and it does come up. So, anyway. This is now a foundation we've built that I can move on to talking about combat a lot. And especially to talk about spells, too. Spells are a very trait-heavy group of things. And also magic items. These kind of three things come about because we've now set up this, honestly, twofold scaffolding of traits and conditions that kind of build upon all these things. There's plenty of stuff in combat that deals with some traits, like your weapons, and conditions. Spells deal with traits a lot, conditions occasionally. And even magic items are very the same, because magic items are somewhere in between attacks and spells a lot of times. So you can see that we're building this foundation for the stuff to come. And I hope that this foundational building has helped you, honestly, to get introduced to another level of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And we'll talk about those next levels of the foundation as we build our house that is Pathfinder 2nd Edition in the future. And hopefully we can learn those. But I've been talking for like an hour and a half, and I think that's a pretty good point to leave it at. I hope everybody has a great day. As you can recall, Tuesdays, Thursdays are my tabletop days where I stream on twitch.tv/the Dracovin Empire, same exact as the YouTube channel. They do eventually go up on the YouTube channel. I am a little behind, but they are showing up as this one is being streamed. You can show up live and chat, which is perfectly fine. You can throw comments into the there. And remember, follow, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, depending on where you're at. Show some support, likes, comments, joining the Discord, check out my Twitch. I do have to improve my Patreon page, but that's something I will be working on in the future. But, just showing your support in various ways, whether monetarily or not, helps. Just being here and enjoying what I'm doing and learning from it helps in general. And anything else you can do to help out to continue these is great. But I will be back next time. More tabletop. We got plenty more topics in Pathfinder and other games to talk about. I hope you learn and enjoy them. Big schedules that I throw out for tabletop. I always talk about in these every Wednesday. Buccaneers of the Shackled Sea. Check it out. They've got their schedule that they talk about for that game. Of course, discussing tabletop on Saturdays. Check that out too. Also goes up on YouTube. Very good place where we talk about, as a group, some very big topics related to playing and DMing/GMing games. And also some various news of the week. So, I will get going now. Thank you, everybody. I hope all of you, again, have a great day. And I will see all of you the next time we talk about some tabletop. And until that time, I bid you the deepest of farewells to everyone. So I will say goodbye.